the people and the women who are affected by the rising sea level on the Atlantic. Salimata, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Mela. Moi, je vais parler en français. Comme les autres l'ont dit, le Sénégal, les femmes du Sénégal s'inscrivent dans la mobilisation des femmes africaines pour faire des exigences par rapport à la prise en charge sur les questions climatiques. Nous sommes d'accord avec les 27 demandes des femmes. Mais au niveau du Sénégal, l'urgence, c'est au niveau du financement. On a besoin d'avoir des financements pour les filets sociaux, pour faire face au choc des pertes et préjudices dont les femmes font face. Compte tenu du patriarcat, qui font que les femmes ne sont pas propriétaires des ressources, il faut imaginer un système qui permette aux femmes d'être compensées. Donc nous pensons dans un premier temps qu'il faut des filets sociaux. Donc trouver les moyens, des grants, des subventions pour appuyer les femmes, surtout sénégalaises, qui ont été victimes cette année des inondations. Les inondations ont fait beaucoup de dégâts au niveau des femmes, au niveau de leurs activités, parce qu'elles sont dans le secteur informel. Elles sont dans l'agriculture familiale, avec des moyens précaires. Donc elles ont besoin d'être appuyées pour aller de l'avant. Donc c'est ça notre préoccupation au niveau du Sénégal, des femmes sénégalaises qui entrent dans la dynamique des femmes africaines. Donc nous avons les mêmes problèmes. Nous vivons la même situation, mais nous avons des urgences particulières peut-être. Au niveau du Sénégal, c'est la protection sociale, les filets sociaux pour les femmes dont nous avons besoin.
Merci. Salimata is just talking about how women are experiencing the climate crisis in Senegal and how they are organizing around building a movement for climate justice in Senegal. I think we are all aware of how the rising sea levels are affecting all coastal countries on the continent, and also based on that, Femnet has been having a number of events, as has been described by my colleague Anne Songole, to build a narrative for the continent based on the realities of African women and based on their experiences and their conceptualization of what does climate justice look like for them, and in the process also came in with some demands on this is what climate justice would look like for African women. And now I'm going to bring in the Executive Director for Femnet, Memory Kachambwa. Memory is going to bring in the demands that are coming from the continent, and particularly on the 8 countries, but going even beyond the 8 countries to cover countries such as Zimbabwe, to cover countries such as Ghana, Nigeria, across the whole, and even including some of our members in Tunisia. And these are the demands which are coming from the women who are working on the land, the indigenous groups, the peasant women, and the women farmers. Memory, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melania Chimponda, for really contextualizing why we are here. And I want to start by saying that we brought together, like what Anne said, women from across the continent to have a space which we're calling the Feminist COP for the first time this year. A safe space where we can bring together African women who might not have been able to access this place, but bringing together women to make their demands in a space where they feel safe, in a space where they are able to articulate. So I'll quickly summarize what were some of the demands that came out from this convening, which was in Namibia. at the sidelines of the Africa Climate and Development Conference. So there are 13 demands. The first two are looking on transition to low carbon economies, because we know this is on the agenda. And the first demand is to advance a just transition as a common position for the continent, centering on ecofeminist future, a future that centers women, a future that really centers indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom, a future that, and a position which is really instituted on the realities and the context specific of the experiences of African women in all their diversity. And this just transition should consider the diversity and representation and equality and justice issue in policy and decision maker. The second demand was on the holding historical and current emitters accountable to ending fossil fuel pollution and demanding a halt to any new extractive initiatives in Africa. We are saying leave it in the ground. Why should we be extracting when we are not benefiting? We have dams which have been constructed for hydroelectric power in the Democratic Republic of Congo, yet the communities have no access to power, no access to that energy. We know that the extraction to fuel the transition to green energy is going to be on Africa, it's going to be on our bodies, it's going to be on our soil, but are we going to benefit? So we want them to be accountable on ending that pollution, on ending the fossil fuels. We are also demanding on debt and climate finance. We are not hearing enough about the reparations. We want to uphold and defend progressive policy considerations on loss and damage and commitment to a dedicated fund for loss and damage beyond the general adaptation funds. We want new funds. We want a facility that is simplified, a facility where women working in Mozambique, women working in Senegal, women working in Ethiopia, women working across the continent can have the money in their hands. A facility that will address the multiple conflicts, the multiple impacts that women are currently facing. A facility that addresses infrastructure, public service delivery, and infrastructure on the ground. We want adaptation of climate financing to local and indigenous climate solutions that promote food sovereignty and sustainable renewable energy. We demand unconditional and debt-free climate finance that is gender responsive, gender transformative, flexible, and multi-year, and delivered directly to communities. We have seen commitments being made. We want direct commitments to communities, but in particular to women and women's rights organizations that are at the front line. Most of the funds are committed, but they end in the administrative structures of institutions that are based in the global north. We want the money and the funds to come directly to us who are working at the front lines. The sixth demand is to develop progressive and radical tax justice systems against corporations, including accountability for minimum and living wage labor compensation. There is a lot of unpaid labor that women at the front lines of the climate crisis are facing. We want compensation for living wages and the recognition as well as the rewarding of that labor. Collectively demand for debt cancellation, reparations for colonial debt and historical and ongoing emissions which have funded and continue to fund the development of the global north. We are demanding for those reparations. On meaningful engagement and participation, we want meaningful and equitable representation of women and girls in all the negotiations. It has to be. They need to have the power to speak and the voice to speak and not be silenced. We want to make sure that the women who are at the front line, the community women leaders, are the ones who are part of the negotiations, that they are able to speak and tell their story and their narratives and make sure that the issues that they are facing are actually not lost in technical jargon, but they are addressed in this conference. We want to facilitate meaningful engagement of civil society before COP, during COP, and even after COP for ensuring accountability. We resist corporate capture. We have seen how corporates, multinationals are capturing these spaces, funding these spaces to silence us. We demand exclusion of multinationals from COP negotiations. Where do private entities have the power to negotiate on behalf of nations, to negotiate on behalf of people? We need to resist this power which is insidious, this power which is coming into our institutions like United Nations, which should be representing us, institutions which should be giving us a voice. We call on all state parties to UNFCCC to prioritize continent-wide land reforms. We need reforms on and ownership of our land, to promote access to and control of our land by women, including ownership and control of the food ecosystem. We are moving into a food crisis, but on the continent, we know it is the women who hold the power and the solution to the food crisis, but we need ownership of the land. We need, and we call on all state parties to invest and promote locally led, gender just, and feminist climate solutions and movements that are anti-capitalist, that are decolonial, and that are collectivized. We are working as a collective, so we really want the promotion and the investment of all the movements that is promoting our demands. And lastly, we call on all state parties to UNFCCC to support the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change. And we call this office to institute effective mechanisms to strengthen the protection and environmental human rights defenders and accountability for abuse, reprisals, and violations by states and corporate actors. Today is a day where we are demanding human rights, but we cannot talk about climate justice without gender justice. We cannot talk about climate justice without racial justice. So we need to demand and act collectively as a continent, and we need the response from COP. So these are our demands as ecofeminists, as a movement coming from the continent.
Memory, thank you very much. Probably the question for the people who are listening is, where do we go from here? And I would like to give this opportunity to Anne Songole to just take us through to, after all these demands, where do we go?
We're going back to our local communities. As we sit here, we are linking all of these demands with the work that we do. We know that there are already processes that are going on, and so these demands are part of the work that we are doing as FemNet, as the African Activists for Climate Justice Project. But these demands are also part of the work that we are doing as FemNet members and our partners across Africa in the 50 countries that we are. And so what we're saying is that this work will inform these demands. We are following thematic areas at COP27. We're making sure that we're making the, getting the right information, and and in order for us to fulfill these demands, we're making sure that we're getting adequate resourcing that will ensure that these demands come to fruition. So you're gonna see us in pre-COP events after this. We're in COP the entire 2 weeks, and you're gonna see us at pre-COP events after this in different countries. And you're also going to see us in several webinars. You're also going to see information pieces. And so these demands are also part of the movements that we're building. So you're going to also see growing movements that are capacitated adequately and that will continue taking this work forward, Mela.
I want to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much, Salimata. Thanks so much, Yolanda, and I would like to thank a very big thank you to the FEMNET Executive Director, Memorika Chambwa, and what Anne has said, that the Feminist COP is going to be a yearly event, so that...
Nous étions, mesdames et messieurs, en train de vous transmettre en direct les sessions de la 27e session de la conférence des parties à la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques COP27 qui se tient actuellement à Sharm el-Sheikh. Et nous avons vu ensemble une des participantes de l'Afrique qui a demandé l'évolution de la femme et l'égalité avec l'homme, mettre fin à l'exploitation des ressources africaines naturelles ou même humaines. En ce qui concerne les dégâts, elle demande une compensation et une réparation et elle réclame également que la justice pour la femme, les droits et la Constitution. Elle a également demandé que les Nations Unies doivent présenter les femmes, ou plutôt nous représenter, et que les femmes sont le noyau de la vie. La protection des droits de l'homme également, c'était sa dernière demande. Merci et tout de suite on se retrouve.